Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. I think we will have these sessions in English, so all panelists you can sit. So it's an honor to be here, and also an honor to have our distinguished panelists for today. So our topic for these sessions, the fourth panel session during this 2 days conference, is on sustainability and ESG reporting, sharing from international view. So we will have 4 panelists. First is Ibu Luthfyana. Ibu Luthfyana is a climate finance senior analyst at Climate Policy Initiative. Before, she was risk manager at Citigroup Investment and CPA Australia Young Professional Committee member in Indonesia. She obtained Bachelor of Business and Commerce from Monash University in 2009 and completed Master of Professional Accounting and Master of Business from Monash University at 2011. Our second panelist for today is Miss Yuki. So Ms. Yuki is a chartered accountant from ICAEW in aspect. She's also a director at GFANZ. She was previously with PwC. She's currently based in Singapore. She got BSc honors degrees in economics from London School of Economics and MSc in environmental change and management from University of Oxford. Our third panelist for today is Mr. Sharath Martin. So Mr. Sharath Martin is ACCA Senior Policy Consultant for the Asia Pacific region. So prior to joining to ACCA, he held senior risk and strategy related roles, primarily at regional basis. Last but not least, panelist for today is our very own Pak Leonardus Wahyu Wasono. So Pak Leo is a senior lecturer from Telkom University. She had previous vast experience in finance and performance management, mainly in telco and financial industry, including as a president commissioner at Lingaja. So he finished bachelor program at SG Telkom, finished master engineering program at RMIT Australia, and he also holds various professional certifications, including CIMA UK, CMA, CGMA, CBA Australia, and CMA Australia. So I will invite all the distinguished guests today to give round of applause to our distinguished panelists for today. All right, without further ado, I think we'll start the session for today with the first presentation from Mr. Sharath. So Mr. Sharath, over to you.
Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you very much to ERE for inviting us here, ACCA, to present to you a few of our findings and thought leadership on this whole subject. Today, I know we're talking about sustainability, but if you would allow me, I think I'd like to focus my presentation particularly around the climate crisis that we see is deeply concerning. So with that, if I could ask for the slides to be presented. Okay, so as you can see, what we want to talk about is the critical role of professional accountants and how we see there is an urgent and fundamental need for professional accountants to play a role. Next. So a little bit about ourselves, for those of you who may not be familiar with ACCA. We've been long established for more than a century. We have offices and centers in more than 100 locations. But I think what gives us pride of place is the number of members and the number of future members or students that we have, who in turn help us to shape the profession, and also they give us deep insights as to what is happening in the business community today. Next. So I thought we will begin, especially since we are starting after lunch, with a poll question for our audience here. So if I can, firstly, let me just tell you that this is a picture of 1 ton of carbon dioxide, right? So we always talk about CO2 emissions, but very rarely do we actually see what 1 ton of CO2 looks like. So now I'm going to ask the organizers if they can bring up the first poll question. Is the poll question ready? Okay, yeah. So this question is about whether you have an appreciation as to how much CO2 Indonesia emits roughly in a year. There are 4 choices that you can pick from, and then I will tell you what the answer is. So let's give us a few seconds to see what the audience thinks the answer is.
So you can open the IAI Launch applications and go to the polling tools, and you can choose the answers of the questions being raised in front of the screen.
Yeah, we seem to have about 40 people who have answered, so we'll just give it maybe another 20 seconds. And this is just to get a bit of a bellwether, a reflection as to where the audience thinks Indonesia's emissions are at. Okay, this is very interesting. Most of you think that Indonesia's emissions are around 8 billion tons. I think this is the accounting or accountant's mindset. We're always very prudent, very conservative, so we've gone for the worst answer. It is actually not that bad. And yesterday I had a different session where I presented it, and then the numbers weren't even close. No one even thought it was in the millions. But the actual answer is 1.8 billion tons. And this is from the Republic of Indonesia government's what we call a biannual update report, which is something that you have to submit as part of the Paris Climate Agreement protocols. So yeah, it's not that bad, but again, it's all relative. China, for example, is about 11 billion. US, I think, is about 8 billion. And this does not measure per capita. Right? If it is a per capita measure, it's a very different analysis. So if I can ask for the slides to move, please. Next slide. Okay. Okay, so the main point about this is the fact that most of the wealth generation in this world comes from nature. About half, roughly, of the world's GDP or the value add comes from nature. And the 3 largest sectors that you can see here, construction, agriculture, and F&B. Now, it is not just these sectors which we should be worried about, because if you look at other sectors like chemicals and aviation and logistics and even real estate, the consequent indirect effect from nature, impact and dependencies is also huge. More than 50% of the value of the supply chain is either highly or moderately impacted, dependent on nature. Next. Okay. Okay, so as good accountants, we are always very evidence-based, and so this just helps you to understand where we are today in terms of this whole climate journey. And you can see from here that the concentrations of carbon dioxide emissions have been unmatched for the last 2 million years. I won't have to read the rest of these things for you. You can take it in on yourself. The point though is we have never gone this far in history in terms of the level of impact that we are seeing from and to nature. Next. But even though we have all of this evidence, there are many who are not convinced, including in the business world, including in the public sector. Some of us are wandering around, and this is quite a layman perspective, but it's very real, because people are feeling the daily temperature rises and they are getting confused with all this talk about a 1.5 degree warming. This has nothing to do with the 1.5 degree warming, and I'll explain a little bit about why that is. There are those then who get it, but then are wondering, what does this mean for my business? I really can't see the impact. And then there's a last category which actually gets the issue, but they feel that the problem is too big for us to handle. Not just at the business level, but in some governments, that's the same view that they take. So we'll unpack a little bit about this when we have our panel discussion later, hopefully. If I can move to the next slide, please. So this slide, hopefully, is something that will help you understand why is there a fuss about this 1.5 degree warming. Essentially, as good accountants, you will know about ecosystem and you will also understand historical data. And the Earth has never seen temperature rise of more than plus or minus 0.5 to 1 degrees for the last 8 to 10,000 years. So it has achieved a relative stability. Why is that important? Because agriculture systems depend on seasonality, cyclical effects. They need stability in the environment. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we make money off nature. From these systems, agrarian systems grew, people got more organized, they coordinated. There was all kinds of systems built, and from there it led to industrialization. And that has happened since about the year 1700s to where we are now. But as you can see, over this last century, and in fact last century and currently, the amount of emissions has grown significantly. So let me move to the next slide to explain where we are. Now, as good accountants, again, you will understand the meaning of a budget. Now, the scientists, this is not an accounting phenomenon. The scientists from IPCC have calculated that we have what we call a remaining carbon budget. Now, that means that we only can afford to release so much more CO2 emissions before we either burst the 1.5 degree warming, 1.7, or 2.0. And if you can see the bubbles on the left, it shows that from the year 2021, we have about 360 billion tons of carbon if we are going to keep it to 1.5, and so on, if it's 660 for 1.7 degrees. If you look towards the top right, you will then see where we are currently emitting the amount of CO2 equivalent in a year, which is about 40 to 42. So you do not need to be a good accountant to work out the maths. Any student in secondary school or in high school can work out the maths. That we basically have about 9 years left until we reach a 1.5 degree, and then it goes further. Now, as you can see on the stuff on the left, I've asked a few questions. Do we really know what happens when we go beyond these points? And let me remind you that in the world of 1.1 and 1.2 degrees warming, we have seen forest fires from Australia to Germany to Europe, and we have seen floods in Pakistan displace people the total population that were displaced was the size of the country where I am from, which is Malaysia. And this is not a small amount. The GDP impact was 2%. It is a question that remains to be answered as to whether 1.1 to 1.2 is what we accountants call a linear effect, 1.2 to 1.3 and 1.4 and 1.5, or whether it's going to be exponential. And I would suggest to us that we actually do not want to find out. We should try and keep it as low as is possible. Next, please. Now, the climate crisis isn't just about rising temperatures, as I've mentioned. It's all interconnected, from rising temperatures to how that is possibly going to impact raw material extraction, the quality, the quantity, the shelf life, from how we're going to, even as we saw earlier, the three biggest industries that depend on nature. One of them is agriculture. Indonesia and Malaysia, we share a very large industry called the palm oil industry. And how will workers go out to harvest and to look after the plantations if it gets into extreme heat waves? These are questions that we need to start dealing with. Rising temperature affects sea levels affects warming, and we go on, acidification and extreme weather events, which I've just touched on earlier. Clearly, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the impact is multidimensional, it is dynamic, and it doesn't mean it's in sequence. It could happen all about the same time, and it could crisscross with each other. Next. Now let me then turn to a couple of findings that we have from a recent, well maybe not so recent, in October 2021 research that we did. And the survey results I'm about to share is from about 700 respondents. And hopefully this insights mean something for us. Next. The first question that we look at is, what is the ambition towards getting to net zero? And you can see from here that the level of companies and respondents that are actually doing something about getting to net zero is very low, globally and even in Asia Pacific. But what is more disheartening is the bars in red on the right, where it is not just that they're not doing anything, but they have got no plans to do so, which is alarming. Now, if you look at the little pie chart on the right, the line in green indicates the amount of emissions that we need to reduce by 2030. That's 55%, and to date we are achieving about 7.5%. So there is a role for businesses to play, there is in fact a role for governments to play to bring down emissions drastically, and we need to do that by deeply and rapidly decarbonizing. Next. So we also asked our respondents, our members, what were the barriers? And you might look at this and say, well, this resonates with me, I can completely understand it. From not being seen as responsible for this issue or lacking a commercial incentive to do something about it, these are some of the issues that we acknowledge. But I also believe that this is a tremendous area of opportunity for us as accountants, from climate data analytics to reporting, which our fellow panelists will touch on, to climate finance, risk management. There are a whole lot of opportunities for accountants. And maybe we will even have time to ask the next poll question later on. But these are some of the issues that we acknowledge. Next. So, I want you to imagine that you are this child standing in the middle of the field, and you are looking out into the future and asking yourself, what will the future look like? This may be you, and this may be maybe if you have children, this could be your child. And the decisions that we take as professional accountants today will impact the lives and the future of these generations to come. Next. So I want to leave you with a few thoughts which hopefully will make you think about this issue deeper. Firstly, as finance leaders, we have an opportunity to be value creators. And we kind of touched on this earlier as well in this morning's presentation as well as yesterday, about whether we play a role beyond. In fact, Ibu Sri Mulyani talked to the profession and said, we're not just number crunchers. We have to move beyond that. And in fact, we have to be value creators. But today, it is no longer a question about being value creators. It's about whether we will be intergenerational value creators, building brands that will last not just in 5 years, but 50 years. And to do that, we can either have a choice to do what's on the left, where we start understanding the science and grapple with it, learn from the experts, and influence our businesses to do better in terms of decarbonizing, putting net zero plans at the heart of strategy, using sustainable finance, as again I think our panelists will touch on, and doing what we're good at, analyzing dependencies, analyzing the impact, and bringing it into decision making. Every decision making needs to ask, how are we doing in terms of the climate impact and dependency? Now, what's on the right is then a more reactionary approach. If we choose not to do what's on the left, then I'm afraid we will deal with situations when they happen. And when they happen, lives will be at stake, displacement risk will be high, you will have customers pressuring you. If you don't do something which is helping them along their own journey, you might lose their business. Assets could get stranded, and you may have policy changes and announcements from the government which you may find in very short term, you have no time to react and respond. So a whole lot of other issues that we will face that we may even talk about during our panel discussion. Next. So I want to leave you with a couple of things that we have in ACCA, which are resources that you can tap on if you want to. We have a sustainable hub, which we make available, not just to our members, but to the profession as a whole. That includes a whole lot of research that we have done around this issue, and you can see it's by sectors and industries. But we've also got online CPDs that some of you may find relevant depending on where you are in your journey. So I won't go into each of these. I'm not here to market these products, but really to tell you that it's there, it's available, and if you want to choose to use it, you can. Next. I'm going to leave you with this thought because I think this is a pivotal point for us in the profession to start thinking about climate in a lot more serious manner and to make decisions that are going to consider how our lives in the future are going to be impacted. So with that, I end my presentation and hand it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharath, for opening the session, so which give us a background on what is the climate, the urgencies, and we'll continue to the next sessions. Whereas our next panelist, Ibu Luthfyana, will talk on the regulatories and the policy perspective. Ibu Luthfyana, please.
Thank you, Pak Budi as moderator, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, fellow accountants, and also thank you for EIE for inviting us, CP Australia, and also for giving me the opportunity to share the stage with the Ms. Yuki, Mr. Sharath, Pak Budi, and also Pak Leonardus. It is an honor, and congratulations on the anniversary of EIE. And today, first of all, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Luthfyana. I'm Senior Analyst at CPI. Climate Policy Initiative is the advisory organizations. We're advising the business, financial institution, and government on how we excel the economy while also addressing the risk of climate change that is also mentioned by Mr. Sharath in the previous presentations. So today, I'm going to focus, share a bit with the fellow participants here on the reporting landscape and also the update on the sustainability progress in Indonesia and Australia. So as we see here, maybe we already heard from the previous speakers, also from yesterday, from keynote speakers from the Ministry of Finance, about the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. So we already seen this image here. So what does it mean? What will be the impact for us as an accountant? So here we see that there are key challenges, not only the opportunities from the SDG. The key challenges that we face as accountants is firstly to manage the reputational risk. Because here in SDG, we're not only think about the financials, there's other aspects that we need to be considered. There's environmental aspects, there's also the socials, and also the governance aspect that we need to address in our reports, and also to manage the reputational risk. Secondly, also in response to the globalization and also digitization, we see that now in the digital economy, in the financing world, not only the financials, not only the bottom line. If we hear in the morning about the marketing, how to bridge the marketing and accounting, we see the whole image of the company, of the business, not only rely on the bottom line, but also the overall image of the company itself. And then thirdly, the key challenge that we see is the policy, the impact of the policy. We see that now so many initiatives is already announced by the countries, not only in Indonesia, but I believe all countries such as Australia, in Europe, European countries also already announced all the policy changes on how to address the risk of climate change, and also to include the sustainability into their reporting. And lastly, we see that all the company has to address the interests of their shareholders. So meeting investor demand for the greater disclosure and also reporting transparency would be very pivotal role for us as accountant. Next. So here, the reporting and disclosure could foster the market disciplines and also the credibility, hence improving the confidence of the investors. So here we see that what are the relationship between the SDGs, us as an accountants, and also what are the risks and the opportunities that are lies amongst these items. In the middle, we see that there's SDGs, and then as accountant, we need to define what are the strategic aspects that we need to consider for our company to adapt to the changing climate work, and also the risk management, and also the financial impact. Because we see accountant, our role as accountant here is how to quantify the impact of climate change to our reporting. So here, reporting and disclosure needs to account the risks of the climate and also the opportunities of the climate change. Risk here, we can see that there are two types of climate risks, the physical risk and the transition risk. The physical risk is basically the risks that are related to the physical aspect of the assets. For example, if we have an asset that lies within the coast, it would be exposed to the physical risk, and also for the transition risk, it is the risk because of there's changes in policies in the future. For example, if we see that government of Indonesia, they have the new rules about the energy, the renewable energy, there will be a tariff, there will be a subsidy. There are the transition risks that is imposed to the companies. And then on the other side, we see the opportunities. So aside from the risk, we see that in internalizing the climate risk, we can see that we can plan the resource more efficiently. We can also consider what are the energy resources that are more sustainable in the future for our operations. And then we can also adjust our strategy on how to market the price, the products, and also the services to the investors, to the customers. And lastly is the resilience, because here as an accountant, we see that a going concern is the main aspect that we need to be really careful for. We want to make sure that our company, our business would be sustainable in the long run. So here, in the blue ones, you see that the income statement, cash flow, and balance sheet that we're really familiar with. This could be impacted by the risks and also the opportunities raised from the temperature change. So on our role on how to limit the 1.5 degrees Celsius, as mentioned by Mr. Sharath earlier, how are we going to adapt to the commitment of the Paris Agreement? Can we go to the next slide? So this is one of the effort on how we're going to comply with the Paris Agreement is basically the reporting landscape, the sustainability reporting. We see here that international scope, there's IFRS, we see back in 2021 after COP26, there's a launch of the ISB, under IFRS, there's also the SSB, they already launched earlier, and what are the interpretation to Australia and Indonesia. So in Australia, the government of Australia and CPO Australia already considered the sustainability aspects. They include this into their operations. And also in Indonesia, Ikatan Akuntan Indonesia also provide the public comments on the exposure draft IFRS IASB, which are closed earlier in the July 2022. And so we're looking forward on the final IASB regulations on sustainability reports. Can we go next? So how are we going to reach the financial issues and sustainable development goals? Here we see that, as we mentioned earlier, there are IASB that already launched last year, and also the exposure draft that are already circulated this year to be having the public comments. And then in Indonesia, we have PSAK, and also there's a reporting on material sustainability impact from the Climate Bonds Initiative, for example, and also there's also TCFD recommendations launched in 2017 in the same time as POJK 51. The POJK 51 2017, I believe that all the fellow ladies and gentlemen here is already familiar with the sustainability reporting. And then also there's also POJK 61 on the green bonds launched in the same year. And we see that the big move made by Indonesia government is the launch of the green taxonomy in the beginning of 2022. So this is the opportunity to integrate the climate-related financial and sustainability reporting for more streamlined disclosure. Next. So this is about the consultation exposure draft on the sustainability disclosure standard in 2022. There's IFRS S1 on the general requirement on sustainability related financial information to be disclosed in the annual reports. And also there's also more detailed disclosure that are already raised by the IASB on the climate related disclosure. This is also aligned with the TCFD recommendation and include the SASB climate-related industry-based requirements. So I believe these two exposure draft has already been commented by EIE. So we're looking forward to see that when this is the regulation enacted, so Indonesia will be ready to also adopt the sustainability disclosure standard aligning with the international standard. Next. So here, if we talk about sustainability, it would cover a very broad coverage, covering from the environment, social, governance, and economic. And we see the first one, the environment would be the most challenging part, although it is already covered by the TCFD recommendation as well as the draft IFRS S2 climate-related disclosure. Because here we need to focus not only on the financials, but also the amount of the emission reductions from our operations and all from the business activities need to be quantified and reported under the IFRS S2 and the CFD recommendations. Next. Here is the snapshot of the current situation and progress on sustainability initiative in Indonesia. Here in Indonesia, we have Financial Services Authority, Otoritas Jasa Keuangan, that launched POJK 51 as a basis for sustainable finance implementation and reporting. So if we move back, few years back, we see that our Indonesia Financial Service Authority already established several regulations, with the key regulations being the POJK 51 and then POJK 60 in 2017. It's the same year when the TCFD was launched. And then in 2018-2019, the reporting of sustainability become mandatory by our regulator. So it is also a gradual move from the launch of the regulations. And then if we move further to 20 and 2021, we see that there's an updated sustainable finance framework, sustainable finance roadmap, the phase 2 by OJK was launched in that year, which also mentioning the first one on the green taxonomy as a guideline of redirecting investment from the carbon-intensive industry to the low-carbon industry. And then they're also mentioning about the ESG integrations and also developing metrics and targets for the emission reduction to reach Indonesia climate goals. And then in 2022, this is when the Indonesia Green Taxonomy was launched, as well as the draft of IFRS was launched. So Indonesia respond timely to the international reporting standard of sustainability, which is very great. So we're, as accountant, we need to stay relevant and timely. So this is the roadmap that already launched by the government, is very much aligned with the international standards. So what are the implementations in the coming years? So when this IFRS or any regulations in regard to sustainability enacted, we as a business, as accountant, we need to stay relevant. We need to be updated and also to make sure that we are comply in terms of the reporting and disclosure. So we need to ensure that our internal operations also align with the requirement of the IFRS sustainability disclosure standard, as well as any regulations, the local regulation, whether it is by PSAK or by OJK, for example, or maybe by Central Bank of Indonesia. They have to be aligned and to move towards into the streamlined disclosure and reporting of sustainability. Next. So this is why are we emphasize our focus on reporting and disclosure. This is based on CPI latest research. We conduct the study, the survey to the financial institution in Indonesia. So the commercial banks represent 60% of the market share. So hopefully the result of our research represent the color of the Indonesia financial commercial banks. We see that Indonesia commercial banks already allocated about 1/3 of their portfolio into the sustainable finance. And then if we see the trend for the past 3 years, it is increasing trend, which is very impressive. It is aligned with the POJK 51, so meaning that the regulation enacted have the impact to the Indonesian banks. And then we see the sectors also, most of the sustainable finance goes to the MSME finance, the social financing, and then also to the green finance in the AVOLU sectors, agriculture, forestry, and land use. And then most of the second top sectors is the energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency sectors. So this is pretty much aligned with the Indonesia G20 presidency. They are focusing on the clean energy transitions, and we see that the Indonesia private sectors also realign their strategy and portfolio towards the clean energy transition efforts. Next. And then this is another advantage. This is also based on our research. We track the climate finance of Indonesia from the private sector contributions. And we see that there's an increasing trend from the 2017 when the regulation of POJK 51 was launched until 2019. So when there's a regulation that that mandated the company to disclose their sustainability standards, we see that there is an increase of the investments towards the climate-related investments. And we see that there is the private sector contribution to the Indonesia climate goals could be further optimized with the greater sustainability disclosure and practice. Because we see here on the left-hand side, the donut graph here, Indonesia needs about 285 billion USD to reach their climate goals by 2030. This is based on the third biennial reports of Indonesia, and past historical data seen here that private sector contribution has not yet optimum. So we believe that by posing more emphasis on the reporting and disclosure could also drive their contribution further for the achievement of Indonesia climate goals. So next, this is my last slide. So the conclusion here is by having the strategic planning, which internalize the climate risks and opportunities as well as sustainability, we can really assess the financial impact to increase our contribution to the Indonesia climate goals and to the sustainable development. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luthfyana. Thank you for the sharing. So we'll continue the sessions with Ms. Yuki. So Ms. Yuki will continue our discussions on the ESGs and climate, especially from the financial side of perspective.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to present to you today. Thank you to the Institute of Accountants of Indonesia for inviting me. So my name is Yuki Yasui, and I'm the Managing Director at the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. I'll talk about that later. And I'm also representing ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. So let me do the sharing of sustainability and ESG reporting. I have 4 key messages. The first one is about ESG risk and reporting. So let me start from that one. Next slide, please. Okay, so the World Economic Forum sets out, identifies global risks every year, and this one is the latest one from last January. The top 10 global risks by severity, 5 of those risks has been environmental, and 3 of the risks have been social. So how does businesses, governments, investors, how do they manage and take into account these risks? Next slide, please. So I think one thing that everyone needs to be aware of is that actually there are 2 very different approaches to risk. So when people say ESG reporting or ESG management, they could be talking about very different things. Now, the left-hand side is looking at it from how environmental and social issues affect the corporation or the investors. So how does climate change impact my investment? On the right-hand side, we are talking about how companies are affecting the environment, the society. So traditionally, they have been coming from very opposite parts of the sustainability landscape. Now, let me go to the next slide to explain that. So the GRI is talking about the impact of companies to the community, to the environment, whilst IIRC or SASB has been very much looking at how climate or social issues affect the enterprise value of companies. Now, the green report, the green color-coded reports have been voluntary. What is really important today is that they are now increasingly becoming a regulatory issue. So TCFD, I've color-coded this as yellow because it's in between. It started as a voluntary reporting, but is now increasingly becoming mandatory. And the two red reports, the European CSRD and ISSB, are the future mandatory reporting that is coming. And I think for accountants in Indonesia and around the globe, this means that in addition to your normal financial reporting, ISSB in particular will be part of your mandate and part of your business. So in a way, it's an excellent opportunity for professional accountants like ourselves, that our mandate on assurance, auditing, on reporting is growing, but you do need to adapt to the new skills and knowledge. So next slide, please. Just to finish off on how environmental and social issues affect the enterprise value and how investors see this in the legal way. So as early as 2005, there has been a report, a legal report called Freshfields Report, that said that given the links between ESG factors and financial performance are increasingly being recognized, integrating ESG issues into investment analysis is clearly permissible and is arguably required for all jurisdictions. Now, fast forward that 10 years later, and in 2019, the legal reports said that failure to consider all long-term investment value drivers, including ESG issues, is a failure of fiduciary duty. So you can see that the investment community has to take into account environmental and social issues, at least for the factors that affect their investment value. Next slide, please. So now let me go on to climate risk and reporting, which has a very different type of approach compared to the more traditional voluntary reportings that we had in the past, like GRI, IRC, or SASB. Next slide, please. So what has really started it off is the regulators, the financial regulators have started to understand that climate risk is a very specific risk that is very new, but fundamentally challenges the risk of the financial system. So Mark Carney, the governor of Bank of England at the time, made a very famous speech called the Breaking the Tragedy of the Horizons. He said that financial accounts or like financial regulation is too backward looking, and that when they are looking at the future, it is too short-termed. What we really need to do to understand the growing risk of climate change is that it really has to be measured in a forward-looking way. And BlackRock in 2020 responded to this like 5 years later, saying that we are at the edge of fundamentally reshaping finance. The evidence on climate risk is compelling investors to reassess core assumptions about modern finance. What is really different, and we'll go to the next slide, is that we are now starting to look at environmental risk in a forward-looking way using scientific information. And this is why TCFD is so very different from the older ESG reportings in the past. So it is forward-looking and it's scenario-based analysis as well. Moving forward. And using this, the financial regulators have started to pick this up as well. So next slide. So there is a network of central banks and financial supervisors called NGFS, which was launched in 2017 and today includes 121 members, including OJK and the Central Bank of Indonesia as well. And what this financial regulator group does is that it is looking at how the environmental and climate risk can be managed in the financial sector because they recognize it as a systemic risk, and also to mobilize mainstream finance to support the transition towards the sustainable economy. So we are really seeing the regulators starting to acknowledge that environmental social risk, especially forward-looking risks, not historical, but forward-looking risk, has to be part of their financial regulatory mandate. Next slide, please. And so some of the regulatory focus on climate risk reporting started off as like carbon reporting, and now expanding to regulations around TCFD. So the G7 countries in 2021 have already backed a mandatory TCFD reporting, and in the UK and Japan it is already mandatory in some of the largest companies, and in Singapore it will be mandatory for certain sectors from 2023 and expanded from 2024. And a lot of the central banks are starting to do climate stress testing as well. And in the US, the Security Exchange Commission is also looking at how to include climate change reporting in their regulation as well. So next slide, please. So this is the Asia view that I borrowed from Deloitte's presentation. You can see the Indonesia OJK's regulation that our previous speaker has mentioned, which is in 2017, that starts off a flood of regulatory activities around climate change regulations, sustainable finance, climate stress testing in this region. And you can see that it is going to continue and expand. So next slide, please. So how is this affecting the financial institutions? So next slide, please. So if we go back, we've seen that I started off the presentation talking about the two different approaches to sustainability. One is how climate change impacts the company, and how the other side is how companies affect the environment. Now, those two differences were quite different. There were large gaps in between them. Today, that gap is coming closer and closer together. Why is that? Next slide, please. Because the financial institutions and a lot of the corporates have started to understand that waiting for regulation and waiting for consumers and businesses to react, and then, and then wait for the demand of green finance to grow and then respond to green finance is no longer the business model that they should be in. The growing number of financial institutions have started to understand that they are also part of the solution, and they need to be part of the solution. So proactively supplying the green finance and engaging with policymakers, engaging with their clients to accelerate the transition is increasingly seen as important for financial institutions. that they need to become future makers rather than future takers. And I think that message is the same for our profession as well. Now, going forward to the next slide. So how this is now translating is that there is a growing community of financial institutions that are proactively working on climate action. There is, for example, this UN-convened Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and where the asset owners have committed to decarbonize their investment portfolio to net zero by 2050. Now, what does that mean? What does a financed emission mean? What does it mean to decarbonize an investment portfolio? It means you are looking at the scope 3 emission of financial institutions that are attributed to their products and services like lending and investment. And how you do that, there is actually a voluntary but global standard called PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which which brings together the financial community to come up with standards on how you attribute lending. If you're lending to a coal mine, what is the lender's attribution of carbon emission that comes from the coal mines? And if you're investing in say coal power plants, what is my attribution? So we do actually have a global standard on accounting for carbon for financiers, and what we know is that the finance emission is about 700 times more for financial institutions compared to their direct emissions, like their lighting and their business travel. So you can see that for financial institutions, their scope 3 financed emission is what they really need to tackle, because that is the great impact that they have on the economy. Next slide. So GFANZ, which is where the institution that I represent, is an alliance of all these net zero alliances in the finance sector. We have over 550 financial institutions that are committed to net zero, so bringing their financed emissions to net zero by 2050. And it represents about 40% of the global financial assets. Unfortunately, we don't have any Indonesian financial institutions that are part of this GFANZ community at the moment, but we think that with the increase in ambition of the Indonesian government through the G20 and the JETP announcements that were made, that we will have Indonesian financial institutions that are committed to net zero as well. Now, let's move on just to finish off, and let me represent and wear my ICAEW hat here. So just to let you know that here at the ICAEW, we do have a lot of sustainability resources. As you have seen earlier, the ISSB and the European Directive on sustainability reporting for corporations is really driving the sustainability, the chartered accountant profession to make sure that they are building the capacity on sustainability and are able to support their clients in reporting and assuring. So next slide, please. I'll just quickly go through 2 slides very quickly. So ICAEW is one of the first major professional bodies to become carbon neutral themselves. And let's just move on. If you can skip the next slide and move on to the next one. And they have now become, like every newsletter that I receive, sustainability is always in the main news in the ICAEW's newsletter. And next slide, please. And there is a lot of resources that if you go to our website, you can actually get as well. There is the Climate Hub, the ESG Assurance, the Modern Slavery, the non-financial reporting, and so forth. And the next slide, please. And there are insights and opinions that you can access even if you are not a member, where there is a lot of information about chartered accountants and how it is related to sustainability. So next slide, please. There is a sustainability certificate for finance professionals on offer. And there is also a growing demand now in ICAEW to understand how to understand biodiversity and natural capital risks and opportunities as accountants as well. So that's also a growing area of concern. So that's the end of my presentation, and I look forward to the discussions with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yuki, for the interesting presentations. We'll move to the last presenters, panelists for today, before we go into our panel discussions. So, Pak Leonardus, please, the floor is up for you. Pak Leonardus is going to talk the ESG climate from the perspective of a company.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for EAI who invite me to share the experience during the developments. And also I'm representing of the CIMA, Indonesia. So I introduce myself. My name is Leonardus Wahyu Wasono. I was former CFO in Telkom Indonesia International for 4 years. And then also former CFO from Telkomsel, 1 year. And also the last one is 1 year in the state local state-owned enterprise, which is Jakarta Property Indo. So I would like to share the experience based on our experience. So this is really maybe the last speaker already speak about the concept of the ESG, which is Mr. Samad already discussed about that. And then Ms. Luthfy talking about the reporting and also disclosure. And the last speaker, Mrs. Yuki, talking about the risk associated with the ESG. So that's why I would like to bring the last session. The end of the day of the activity is creating the value. So I will divide to the three part of our speaker. The first is related with how the investor looking at the value regarding with the development of the ESG. The second part is I would like to discuss about the importance of the accountant, which is part of our professional, to promote how the importance of ESG reporting, sustainability reporting, for developing of the value creation for the company. And the last one, I would like to share the experience when developing of the sustainability reporting. The important thing of the sustainability reporting is how we measure and what is the priority to be reported. Because a lot of development happen in the company, and we would like to bring the value to the investor, and also to measure what is the measure progress every year. So we have to come up with the roadmap about the sustainability report, and consistently we report and disclose to the investor. So the three part I would like to discuss this afternoon. So next, please. So actually, I start with some paper from the Oxford in 2015 regarding what is the impact when the ESG reporting has been disclosed. The first is 90% of respondents saying that the ESG standard will lowering the cost of capital. Why? Because if you look at the development and supporting of the international association and everything regarding with the ESG, a lot of funding actually supporting to have the lowering of the capital structure of the company. So if we can creating the the activity to supporting the ESG activity, so I think based on the research that has been disclosed in 2015 is going to be impact also to have the lowering impact of our cost of capital. And then 88% of the respondents saying that this is going to be better operation performance. Because if you look at the pressure of the international regarding with how the companies should be including the ESG reporting, sustainability reporting, in that reporting, that kind pressure can also accelerate how the operational excellence can support. It's not only based on the economic profit, but also based on the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. And then based on another, Aust study, 80% responding saying that stock price performance is going to be increased. Because if you look at the trend currently, there is also some investors that are looking at which the company that can categorize as the green company. And there is also some categories, and they are supporting to invest some part only for the stock that already disclosed and has been supporting to support the sustainability reporting. So that's why in terms of this survey, actually there is some, some positive signal why the sustainability reporting has become important. Next, please. And then if you look at why ESG is very important, there is a lot of discussion that we are conclude that with the ESG reporting we can support, there is some beneficial. It's not only for the company, it's not only for the owner of the asset, but also for the society, policymaker, and also for the investment. If you look at the company, they are talking about the long term. Long term, how the company creating, supporting for the, the planet, for the environment, and also responsibility also for the next generation. This is some important regarding with the company. For the owner asset, if you look at this one, they also have the better performance. They are also the better for long term. Because if you look at the benefit for the company, that they're going to be long term. So the owner are also supporting from that one. For the society, they are going to be talking about how they have the responsibility for next generation. So they are creating the good, fundamental for the earth. Is not only for the profit, making profit, but also for the social. And then, of course, for the investment and also for the developing of the policy. Okay, next please. And then there is why the paradigm already changed. Before we are talking only yesterday we are talking about the economic profit. The second, we only just focus on the shareholder financial report, preparing for investment analysis. Currently, we need to have, the some changing in terms of the global crisis that already mentioned by Ms. Yuki before, regarding with the climate crisis, the ecological overshoot. That one is not only just the company thinking about the profit. They need talking beyond than the profit. So they are talking about the value for the company, value for the next generation. The second is the global driver, the pressure of the global driver related with the industrialization happen. So they need also talking about what they are responsible for the environment, for the governance, and also for the social. And then interconnect of the civil society that already happened. This is already massive, so that's why we need to have the rule. We need to have the responsibility for that one. And then the emerging technology, the effect of globalization, poverty, that one is driven. We need to have the something that is not only just talking about the economic, but also another part that needed to be considered, which is social, environment, and governance. And then we also need to expand, like I mentioned, by the end of the day, we need to have the value. We need to have the triple bottom line: people, profit, and planet. Because we're in expanding the value. It's not only based the economic value, but also in the social and governance value. Okay, next please. And then if you look at what is the investor point of view, the investor is looking for the risk, we call the responsibility investment. They need to have the economic value, the economic of financial, high financial impact, but also impact of the risk is also not, they can mitigate, so they can manage for that one. So we come at the maximum, the investment, they see that as the part of the responsible investment, which is they use to mitigate ESG risk in order to protect the value. So this is the way of investment looking at the company. They're not straightforward to have the sustainability investment, which is adopt progressive, but they see how the value can be created. So that's why if you look at this one, the type of investment is mostly they are talking about the responsible investment. Next, please. And then the basic principle when we are talking about the investment, they're looking at the ESG reporting, sustainability reporting is part of the part of the investment analysis and decision. So in some part of the weighted of the value when they decide to invest in the company, they see what is the the contribution of the ESG of the company. The second, they also incorporated some part of the ESG in their portfolio. I have some cases when I was in the the local state-owned enterprise. There's some European company looking for the equity to invest in one of the big project regarding with what we transform from the from the carpet to become the electrical power. We call that technology is ETF, which is intermediate treatment facility. So every day, if you look at the Jakarta, they have around 7,000 ton carpet coming from Jakarta. And then if we can transform to become the electrical, so that one, we can creating the impact, how we can making the carpet to become the most useful regarding with the electrical power. So that one, a lot of interesting investments looking at what is the impact for the environment. The third is they are looking also the disclosure of the ESG reporting, because the disclosure has become the important to become the part of decision when they decide to invest in some company. And the last, they also have the investment, the implementation of principle based on the the weighted, what is the impact of the sustainability in when they decide to invest in some company. And then they see also the continuity, they enhance the implementation, which is the continuity that they can measure. What is the progress that we are stated when already we are disclosed in the the sustainability report. Okay, next please. And then this is the second part. What is the role of our profession, which is the accountant? So there is several proposed regarding the accountant regarding with the sustainability report. The first, they can help elevating ESG value creation. They can support what kind of the parameter that can be disclosed in terms of how measurements, measurement indicator to support the investment in evaluate the value of the company. So as the accountant, you can propose, you can see what is the indicator to create value for the company. The second, they can also have the positive change regarding with the inclusivity and diversity and carbon. So it's mean when the accountants supporting the program, supporting the the activity, so they can also know what is the key parameter to be disclosed, to be reporting in the reporting. The third one is as the accountant, you have to update with the relevant and also the updated of knowledge and skill. So as the accountant, with the new perspective of sustainability, you can stay relevant. You can be part of the management in decision making. So this is important for the accountant. And then is the last one is the important is as the accountant, you can promote. You can proactive as the consultant. With the development of the activity, it's not the current profit that you can take in, but for the future. You can, as the consultant, you can help them to understand that with the development of sustainability, you can help the company and creating value for the company. Okay, next please. And this is the last session regarding what the practice, how the content can help, the company in creating the value. So we are starting with the, local government state-owned, which is the JAKPRO. We have the 7 company. We have around 2 billion asset, which is the almost all Jakarta infrastructure is under Jakarta Property Indo. And then, so we are trying developing of, the sustainability reporting, and this is the third years that we try to develop, and we try to make sure the value that we are creating in the sustainability reporting can be understood, can be traced, and can be transparent, disclosed, and also we try to prioritize, the program to be to be disclosed in the financial reporting. Next, please. So we come up with what is the strategy of the sustainability. We come up with 4 perspectives of the company to be. Regarding with the people, we have the, regarding with the people, we have the program regarding with the enhancing people quality of life, which is we have come up with the 3 of the strategy: diverse and inclusive community, smart mobility, and public health well-being. And then in terms of the governance, we have the adaptive governance and policy. And the profit, actually, we come up with the 2 things regarding with the economic growth and also with the how we can support for the city, which is environment resilience. So this is the way we come up first with the strategy and we try to measure. Okay, next please. Next, please. And this is the outcome. Why we need to have the measurement? Because we will gonna be disclose all the reporting to the investor. So that's why we need to have the consistent, we need to have the priority, we need to have the strategy. Why this is important? Because we're gonna have the, the sum of value creation is not only from the economic profit, but also from others. So we come up with the four parameters aligned with the strategy, with the some distinct regarding with the some part, like the people quality. We have the people quality of life and integrated human capital. Regarding with the with the governance, we have the operational excellence, and the profit, we have the environment and economic value. And we list down what is the measurement is going to be for next 3 or 5 years. Okay, next please. And from that, we have the 4 priority. The first regarding with the environment resilience. In environment resilience, we have the SUM program and we try to measure, starting from the urban regeneration, transit developments, and climate change. What is going to be our program and how we measure? Because we're going to be disclosed to the, to the investor. Next, please. The second regarding with the enhanced people quality, we also have some activity and we try to see what is the measurement is and how it's going to be disclosed to the investor regarding with the diverse and technical community and then smart mobility and also people health being. So and we are focusing on the people health being as the part of our disclosure. Okay, next please. And then regarding with the strengthening of economy, We have the economic growth, innovation, technology, and also urban resilience. So we are focusing on the innovation and technology because that one is going to bring the value creation for the future. Next, please. And then for the governance, we have the corporate governance, strong collaboration, and adaptive system and management. Whole thing is going to be our priority to make sure that everything is going to be aligned with the governance process. Okay, next, please. And then the last one, we have the roadmap priority, with part of priority that is going to be disclosed in the financial sustainability report. So this is the whole thing, the process, the practice to make sure that value creating because of sustainability reporting can be captured by investor, can be captured by the the stakeholder to make sure the value that creating by the company by disclosing this sustainability report can be maximize the value for the company. So that's all from our presentation. Thank you, and I'm back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonardus. Thank you for all the panelists for the presentations. I think it will give some of us a bit of background on what is the ESG, the climate. I think the panelists have talked and covered from the policies, from the regulatories, from the reportings, from the risks, from the finance side. And as well, Leonardus has also talked from the company side with examples of how the company is preparing towards this ESG reporting and sustainability. I think we will go into the Q&A sessions. Before I open the Q&A, I think I will ask the organizing committee to help showing up the poll questions. I know that it's very tough after lunch. I think most of us are maybe sleepy, so hopefully with this activity we'll open and start with the Q&A. If the organizing committee can show the poll questions. Okay, I think if shown to your screen in front of you, that you can open your applications. So the questions is, in which areas do you believe there are opportunities for us as accountants and finance leaders to address the climate actions? Right, I think aligned with the result from the screens, as you can see that, well, the polls is still running, but we can see that the sustainability reporting is something that most of you is looking at as the areas where we actually can look at. So I'll start with asking questions, and maybe the floor, you can raise some more questions. I think if we look at from sustainability reporting, if I may start the questions to Ibu Lutfi maybe, that when we talk about the ESG, sustainability, ESG reporting and assurance, especially with regard to the result of poll questions on sustainability assurance, what do you see as a challenge that a company are usually facing? And do you actually see that, or feel that external assurance is actually required especially for the purpose of comparability transparency or accuracy of the reporting itself?
Thank you, Pak Budi, for the questions. So, for the biggest obstacle for the ESG reporting faced by the company, firstly is there are many ESG frameworks in the market. So, there are GRI, there's also taxonomy, there's sustainability accounting standard, TCFDs, and there's no single global standard for ESG reporting currently exists. So, we are allowed to use a variety of frameworks to report this kind of informations. And also they're sure that a lot of regional or industry-specific standards to choose from. So that's the first obstacles. And then the second one, on the regulation side, we see that the regulations on ESG is still evolving. For example, last year after COP26 in November, there was a launch of International Financial Reporting Standard Foundations announced on the IASB to deliver the comprehensive global sustainability related disclosure standards. So this is one of the efforts to make the reporting, to have the common grounds on the ESG frameworks. And also it is responded by Indonesian governments, by the OJK. There is a green taxonomy launch, but in the beginning of this year, there's also sustainable finance roadmap to be aligned with the global evolving ESG regulations. So whatever all the standards are currently evolving, it has to be have a value added, as mentioned earlier by Pak Leonardus, to provide investor and market
England and
with the informations with these regards. And then the third challenges other than the regulations and also the framework could be the data. We face that there's a complex ESG data management. We need to pick which data to present, and then how are we going to compact this data to deliver the information correctly to the investors for their decisions making. And then lastly, the key challenges on ESG reporting is to understand, manage, and quantifying the risks of ESG. So basically, ESG reporting is new, it's still evolving. So at its stance that the comparability between the ESG reports is still low, but we need to adapt as a content because there's an increased investor demands for the consistency is very high for these reportings. So in regards on the assurance, without the better quality assurance and measurement in place, it is difficult to understand to communicate which data and information, the true value of sustainability to the business. So it is critical to have the external assurance on ESG reporting to enable the comparability, transparency, and also the accuracy of the ESG reporting that are conducted by the companies. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Bu Luthfi. Thank you, Bu Luthfi. And although we also noted that during our discussions, I think one of the challenges as well on the assurance side is that because the standards itself is still new, and the consistencies amongst how to interpret that standards toward how we perform the procedures to give it assurance, the consistency may become a challenge. I mean, one person doing it may have a different results on the other person's doing it. The consistency may be some obstacles. So before we continue, I think I'll ask the audience if you do have any questions. You can put your questions into the applications. I think I haven't seen any questions. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so there are questions coming in. It is addressed to you, Sharath. So the question is, the key to improving sustainability is how we reduce our need for the fossil fuel-based industry. The down phase we face, if we do this, is the economy itself. So what do you think about this dilemma?
Okay, firstly, I think thank you for the question. I'm just now beginning to see it. So I think the question is about the fact that we need to reduce the need for fossil fuel, and the fact also is that the economy is very reliant on this. And you've just presented the situation as it is. There is no easy solution to this. Green technology exists, but it takes time. It takes time to build renewable energy and infrastructure for the delivery of such energy. But I think that doesn't mean that we should continue along with more investments in fossil fuels. So we need deep and radical decarbonization of our value chain. And we need to start thinking about how much we are prepared to invest in this. Clearly, as you saw from some of the insight that I shared, the investments are lagging. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier during lunch was, as accountants, we tend to use this wonderful thing called discounting when we evaluate investments. But when we use this discounting method, we end up downplaying, I think, the risks and the possible opportunities that could come about from different forms of investments into greener technology. So the answer to this question, I think, is there is not going to be an easy balance in this. I think one of the things that Ibu Luthfi, in fact, works on is the whole concept of just transition. So I'm not sure if she wants to also address this issue, but we have to grapple with this as accountants in business, and we have to grapple with this as accountants in state-owned enterprises as well.
Yes, Ms. Yuki, you want to add?
Is this working? Yeah. So let me add to that. So there is a new concept called managed phase-out of high-emitting assets, meaning that we need to purposely accelerate the phase-out of fossil fuel assets to allow for renewable energy and non-fossil fuel assets to come in. And in Asia, this is especially important because the assets are, on average, much younger than the assets in Europe or in the US. For example, coal power generation assets in Indonesia or in emerging markets in Asia are about 11 to 13 years old, whilst in the US, it's about 41 years old. So if we wait for the natural retirement of coal power generation in Indonesia, we will never reach the 1.5 degree ambition. So the idea is that we need to purposely phase it out using both public finance, so taxpayers' money coming from the G7 countries, as well as taxpayers' money coming from the host countries, also concessional finance coming from philanthropies, and coming from the commercial private finance as well. We need a lot of blended financing to accelerate this. But it's a very new idea, and it's something that GFANZ is working on through the JETP process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yuki. I think just to continue on that questions, I think we do have another questions from the audience, which is addressed to you, still related to the fossil fuel. So what do you think about UK offers more than 100 licenses in the North Sea for the exploration of fossil fuel? So the questions is, what do you think about UK offers? What do you think about UK offers more than 100 licenses in the North Sea for the exploration of fossil fuel? The question is from Pak Fatir Brata Dinata.
So I think right now, because of the energy crisis in Europe especially, there is a lot of regeneration or regeneration of interest in fossil fuel exploration. At the same time, we have also seen a huge increase in the pipeline of renewable energy projects. And in the long term, I think the fossil fuel will be a short-term response to the energy crisis, and that the renewable energy will be accelerated, and that while the fossil fuel increase will be a short-term increase, we think that over the long term, we will see much quicker and bigger uptake in renewable energy.
Thank you, Mr. Yuki.
Pak Budi, if I may
Yeah,
also
sure.
add to that. I think this question is also touching on the issue of what we call greenwashing. And if someone in the audience is raising this, this is, reflective of what is happening in society. In fact, the UK, there has an advertising watchdog, and it called out one of the banks for, on the one hand, advertising about what he was doing on tree planting and what he was doing in getting to net zero, but without acknowledging that it was continuing to do fossil fuel financing. So this is a real issue. And as accountants, and if you link this back with what was said yesterday and today, we are somewhat in the center of the issue of trust, accountability, and integrity. And therefore, when we put out information, believe me, someone like you is going to be out there catching for instances of whether we are misreporting and kind of greenwashing the information. So if you can pick this up, we have to be equally vigilant that when we put out the information, it's got to be sound, it's got to be solid, it's got to be beyond someone taking us to task.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay, we can move to the next questions. There's a question from Rian Perdana. So the question is addressed to Ibu Luthfi. The question is, do you have any recommendations for strengthening the Indonesian's ESG regulatory framework? I think they are also relates to the questions from Pak Yanuar, which is the questions was, as the close neighbor of Indonesia, what are Australia or ASEAN support or collaboration for ESG issues in Indonesia? What should be prepared for by professional accountants to adopt for this? I think the questions will relate to, is there any support, or collaborations, or any recommendations which basically to help to strengthen our Indonesia ESG preparations toward where it should be.
Thank you, Pak Budi, and thank you, Pak Rian and Pak Yanuar for the questions. Let me address the first one about the strengthening ESG framework. And if I may relate it to the previous questions about the fossil fuel financing, one of the recommendation could be us as an accountant, we need to keep updated on the development of the taxonomy. We do have green taxonomy in Indonesia now, which is a big move towards moving into the low carbon economy. But we need to also emphasize that our economy is very, we have a high reliance still to the fossil fuels. So we need to ensure that these industries has the opportunity to move towards low carbon economy by, for example, allowing the transitions finance to be included into the green taxonomy, for example, and then for the Australia or ASEAN support for the Indonesia in strengthening the ESG framework could be also by allowing the interoperability between the taxonomy. We know that ASEAN have the sustainable finance taxonomy. So for example, if our taxonomy can be interoperable with the ASEAN taxonomy, it could widen our pool of finance to enable the technology or the industry to move towards fossil fuel-based energy to the low carbon transitions. And then other than the taxonomy, what we need to prepare as an accountant is the measurement. We need to ensure that we understand what the data we need to develop the key metrics, the key performance indicator on how are we going to translate certain amount of emission reduction, for example, to how much money we need or how much money that we need to set aside in our books to ensure that we internalize this risk into our operations. So by internalizing this kind of risks and opportunities from the climate risk, for instance, our company will have to be, we will be more ready to strategize and also have more finance in place to face this kind of challenge in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Luthfy. It's always interesting when Luthfy are raising about the measurements and how to do that measurements, especially for us from which are practicing mostly on as an accountant. One of the things is it's very unique that the challenge that we just also discussed, the measurement depends on the consistency is always a challenge. Depends on how or from where point of view we are looking at it. I mean, if we are looking at it from the perspective of a company, the measurement may be different if you're looking at from the perspective of the external party. Just like us, if we are as accountant, we are looking at a fair value, we do have in the accounting standards, but it's pretty clear in the accounting standards that saying the fair value has to be viewed from the market participant point of view. Where in this case, it may not be clear yet. That's why the measurement is sometimes can be a challenge, and consistency is one of the complications that we probably have to face. Okay, I think we are a bit running out of time. Just calling for one last questions, maybe, if we do have. So this question is for you, Sharath. So how much it costs? The question is from Gary Chandra. How much it costs in percentage that should be considered to allocate for listed companies in Indonesia Stock Exchange? Sorry, the question is. Oh, they probably, sorry, Pak Gary Chandra, if you're here and maybe I'm interpreting your questions inappropriately, please do raise and clarify it. I guess the question is, if you happen to be an entity which is listed in the Indonesian Stock Exchange, how much do we have to allocate as a cost to prepare for this ESG roadmap?
Okay, yeah, because I kind of understood the question as investment, but you could also look at the question as costs. And again, I think firstly, if you're in different industries, the answer is different. But I want to share with you a little story about a presentation that I did in another country. And it was a CFO forum. And I put two questions to them. I said, how much are you investing in technology? That number was going at about 10 to 20%. Then I asked a question, how much are you investing in ESG? And that number was below 5%. So if it is below 5%, you can understand why we are where we are. So I don't have a magic number for you, but I will tell you, if it is 5% investment, we are asking for trouble down the road. I think in terms of costs, that is a far more difficult question because it depends on the business and the nature of business that you're in, the supply chain, etc. It would be, even if I was in the stock exchange, I would not put specific numbers, blanket basis for any company. I think you don't start this way. You start by looking at your value chain, your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, your finance emissions, and asking yourself, where is our biggest issue and how do we address those parts? Because, and this now comes to your question about costs, I think. If you don't, then you have to be prepared to pay either something extra or lose revenue opportunities. So I think that's a point that we need to start reflecting on much, much deeper. And I think that's one of the benefits of focusing on an ESG strategy. It forces you to understand your value chain beyond your immediate supplier and beyond your customer, meaning you have to understand what's happening with your customer's customer. You have to understand what is happening with your supplier's supplier. Where are they getting materials from? Will there be a risk if something were to happen wrong in terms of nature, in terms of climate? So I think there's loads of opportunities here for you as finance leaders, and you've got to use data analytics. You've got to use the measurements. There's a different skill set that is needed, particularly in understanding climate science. So you've got to involve outside people as well.
Can I just add to that?
Yep.
Just to demonstrate the scale of need to really ramp up sustainable finance, Bloomberg New Energy Finance did a study of how much financing we need to increase towards transition and net zero to meet the 1.5 ambition. And they currently suggest that for every dollar of investment that goes to maintaining fossil fuel investments, we need to quadruple, so $4 to renewable energy investment to catch up. So it is, and that is every year until 2030. So it is, 4 times the investment.
It's not a percentage of, but it's a multiplier of.
Quadrupling.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yuki. Thank you, Sharath. So I think the time has to separate us, and just before we close the session for today, I just want to wrap up all the discussions that we have. We do have a lot of conversations and presentation from the panelists, but I think one point that we can underline is that the natural risk is rising, and this is not just urgent, it's something that is, that's why everyone is now talking about it. The Paris Agreement is already signed. Indonesia is committed towards the net zero. I think this is becoming a hot topic, so it's coming. Like it or not, we just have to prepare the roadmaps. I think the regulatory is also in preparation of it. Indonesians has formed a task force talking about ESGs and its roadmap. I think we just have to take and see the positive side of it and prepare for it for the benefit of us as well as the next generations. And I think one thing that also I take from Leonardus is that what is the benefit for us as the company? You can see that you will have a lower cost of capitals, and it will translate into a better operational performance, which eventually will reflect into your company's share price. I think thanks again for listening to us. And thank you for, and sorry for all the miswording and maybe the things that is not appropriately delivered to read the sessions. But thank you very much for having us here. And thank you for all the panelists. Please give a round of applause to all the panelists today. Thank you.